Hey everybody, Tom Murray here, Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools, and what an honor it is to be back on the podcast. It's been a while. The only difference is I don't have a plate full of wings this time, you know? Kind of disappointed. I sat back down here at the conference and there's not sweet and sour wings or something in front of me, so it's good to be back, my friend. Good to see you.
We are saving that for ISTE.
There we go. Yeah, all right, that'll work.
With Brianna technically holds the belt. So
that sounds good.
She outwinged us that day. So yeah, definitely. It's good to have you on the show, and it's good to finally have you in person on the show. I kind of stopped doing the virtual stuff and not doing, the in-person conferences and the in-person podcasting. So thanks again, man.
Absolutely.
Thanks again. I shot you that message a couple weeks ago when I got the okay to thumbs up to record here. So we are at GAETC, Georgia Educational Technology Conference, here in Atlanta, Georgia. So I haven't been here in 10 years. It's been a while.
I think it's been about 5 for me, and I'm sorry to disappoint you. I know I'm a lot better looking virtually in my 1-inch by 1-inch box than here in person. So sorry to disappoint you on that one, my friend.
Well, sorry to disappoint the folks out here, but I've been told many times that I have a face for podcast, for audio podcast. So, all right. So you are with Future Ready Schools. There's a bunch of people that are on that. Haley Medina. You got Carl Hooker and a bunch of other people. What made you want to get into education?
Yeah,
of all things.
Yeah, so for me, I went to college and I thought I always knew I wanted to work with kids. I always loved working with children, and I went there pre-med thinking I want to be a pediatrician. Started my freshman year, took all those classes, I was loving it, and something just hit inside of me of I wanted to work with kids beyond when they were sick. And so I transitioned from that first year to then just be in elementary education my second year, and it's elementary education in psychology. And so I moved my major over, and I am so glad that I did, and I haven't looked back since. And so moving there into teaching elementary school was my first job, and I taught 4th grade. I then went and taught middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I was then a secondary principal. I was then an elementary principal, and then I went over to district office. I obviously couldn't keep a job, so now I work out of Washington, D.C. Makes total sense, right?
Yeah. And yesterday was election day, which we will not talk about. So with that being said, man, being a male in a female-dominated industry, there's some stigmas that come along with it. There's some experiences that I'll talk about one particular experience that I had when I was a paraprofessional that really stuck out to this day, and it has now put me in a state of awareness ever since that one day. So I'm calling this passion over paycheck, because we all know in education the paycheck's there, but it's not what your typical, I hate to use the word, but your breadwinner, your bread maker of the family. It's not what other vocations and other careers are. We don't get Christmas bonuses. Even if you're at the district level, you don't get that Christmas bonus. We get incremental, I guess, raises on occasion. Every once in a while they'll throw a, what is that called? Retention bonus in our direction, while the price of our benefits skyrockets every year. So it's really kind of a pay cut at times. I've been in education over 20 years. You, how long?
25.
25, okay. What keeps you here?
Yeah, so for me, it's going back to your idea of purpose and making that purpose. Nobody goes into elementary education because they want to retire a millionaire. That's not the goal. When I said, and kind of joking here, being back in college, why did I get into that? Being a male in elementary education in college was not a bad spot to be, right?
Yeah.
Just teasing on that. But, but for me, wanting to work with kids, and especially wanting to work with young kids, the amount of times when I left and graduating in 2000 and going out, I almost had my pick of elementary jobs, because being a male at the elementary level was not the norm. I taught with one other male in my building, heavily female, dominated in that building. So for me, I felt kind of like husband or dad to so many folks. I've changed tires out there, just helping my colleagues, and hey, can you move this for me? And but I think it's also opened my eyes up to a lot. Being a white male in our society today, there's been so many things in life that like I've taken for granted that I haven't had to think twice about. That where I walk certain spots never crosses my mind. It really opened up my eyes to just being very conscious of what others go through, right? And just hearing from my female colleagues, building relationships and being connected and having that trust where they could just keep it real with me. And so it really helped me to take for granted, or some things I had taken for granted in life up until that point, to see it through a different lens, to see it through a different perspective. It was interesting because especially in our profession, then having gone on to be a principal, and today working with superintendents, working with district leaders around the country, what's interesting is even though it's a female-dominated profession, it's not necessarily on the top, and females struggle with whether it's that glass ceiling or however you want to phrase it, where you look at just a couple weeks ago, I was keynoting the Maine Superintendent's Conference, and I look around, the vast majority of folks are men. And so what's really interesting is in the classroom, yes, it's female dominated, but in leadership, it's definitely male dominated. And so part of the reason I share that is I'm very, especially leading future ready schools, very equity focused, very much about amplifying the voices of others, kind of like you do on your podcast, making sure that we come at it with different perspectives and diverse perspectives. I looked at it as I was going back to being a fourth grade teacher, I was the first male that any of those students in those years had in the classroom. And I would have countless parents say to me, I'm so glad we had a male. This year, my son's in fifth grade, and it's the first year he has a male teacher. And as a boy, I can tell you the amount of times he comes home and he's super excited about that. And by the way, his first 5 teachers from kindergarten to fourth, they were amazing. Yeah. Those female teachers were incredible. He was in the right spot. But for him, it was just something a little bit different, relating and connecting to the boys. And so, it has been an interesting place to be, but I think part of that lesson is how do we see through the lens of others? How do we hear the stories of others? How do we get to connect? Because we all know our world, our lens, our upbringing. We see the world in our way, but recognizing our colleagues and then each one of our students see it in a different way. And that can be gender, that can be race, that can be religion, that can be so many different facets when we celebrate just the diversity of the strength of folks in our building, that stuff, that it helps us step back at times and evaluate our own lens to see where are my blinders, where are my
30,000 foot view kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that that was actually you answered one of my leading questions.
And when I realized I didn't answer your question at all. I went back to the mail. You asked me why I do this work or why I stay involved in this work, And I think especially, during COVID when we've talked about teachers in classrooms and the notion of self-care and you just look at statistics and the amount fewer of folks that are going into the profession. You look at statistics on the amount of folks that have been leaving the profession.
In droves.
And it's so clear. People are leaving and people aren't coming into it. My buddy Joe Sanfilippo, one of my best friends, we do a lot of work. He talks about, and one of his quotes that I love to share is they won't stop talking about the way they won't stop talking about schools until we stop talking about schools in the way that we talk about it. It's something along those lines of many times we as educators, our narrative can be very negative, like not wanting to be here. And so we have to ask ourselves, where is that narrative going to be to help people want to be into the profession? And we can dive into so many facets of why folks have left and pay and benefits and just struggles and get things done. I'd also say, a struggle with leadership. For me, why do I stay? It goes back to my purpose. It goes back to my why. It goes back to recognizing I was dealt certain things in life in a 2-parent household where my conversations were always when you go to college, didn't grow up wealthy, but I had what I needed. Yeah. And I took so many things for granted. And I realized early on there were so many students that never had what I took for granted in life. And so for me, part of my mission and my passion, it's why I work for an equity-focused organization, is to try and help level the playing field, to help provide the access, the opportunity, and a sense of belonging for each child, no matter what their zip code is. There is so much work to be done. And when I look into the innocent eyes I was with kids just last night in Texas on a strategic planning piece, and when I look through the eyes of children and what they need in those pieces, how can I help support them to provide the access, the opportunity, and the sense of belonging so that they can ultimately live life on their own terms.
That was beautifully put, man. Beautifully put. Going back to your first teaching job, fourth grade, you said, right?
Yep.
It's actually mine as well.
Yep.
I'm going to put this out there. If you want to hear the rest of this, you got to buy a copy of my book. But I'm going to give I'll give everyone a little tidbit. Is I knew I wanted to become a teacher in second grade. Second grade, I was sitting on the carpet with the rest of the class. Teacher was asking about professions. How many of you want to be a doctor, so on and so forth. And then he asked, I'll never forget, how many of you want to be a teacher? And I was the only student who rose their hand. Why? in second grade, I don't know why I rose my hand. Maybe I rose my hand because I was the only one who rose their hand. But from that moment on, that was it. I was the first person in my family to finish college. I had another brother, shout out to Sergio, he started it, and then life happened and he did what he had to do. But I was the first one to finish. It's funny you say about Texas, you've been there multiple times. Texas is all about the colleges and the teams, and if you go to one college, then it's almost inherent that you can't even say the other college, in the same sentence as someone else. But I didn't grow up with that. I grew up with, if you want to go to college, you go to college. It didn't matter if it was a rival school to somebody else's. It's now that I live in Texas and I hear you went to A&M, UT. I didn't grow up like that. If somebody said, if my son told me I went to San Diego State University, if one of my two sons said I want to go to UCSD, University of California, San Diego, awesome. I'm not going to tell him that was a rival. No, it's a college. That you have a goal. Like where I came from, the way I grew up, just going to college, even if you dropped out, that alone was a feat. So when I got my first class as a fourth grade teacher, I'll never forget that first day. I'll never forget those faces. I actually still have the picture and the roster of my students. But you said you were one of two males in the building?
Yep. The other one was a music teacher.
Okay, all right. That's exactly what I was going to ask.
I should clarify that. My very first year, there was one other male teacher. I tell the story. It was actually my mentor. I tell the story in Chapter 1 of Personal and Authentic. And so I was with him the first year. And the music teacher was also male, but he was only there a couple of days a week. So it was two kind of two and a half.
Campuses,
You were just building on something that I think has shifted so much in the past, I'd say 20 years. And working around the country and working with high school redesign and working on different things, it's interesting because our generation, I think, like I had shared earlier, my conversation with my parents, my father was first generation college, my mother was second generation, but for me the expectation was when you go to school. So that's all I knew. And so recognizing that so many of our kids didn't have that at home, it's interesting how much it's evolved, and especially when we talk about this is a shifting workforce, the shifting economy, the new role of AI is that extrapolates, and how high schools are meeting the needs of kids in different ways. Because I think during No Child Left Behind, we started putting kids in these four-year college boxes, and that was a metric of success. It was how many of your kids are going to a four-year college or four-year school, and what a mistake that was, right? College and four-year college is not for every kid, and you know what? Good. That's okay, right? You ever pay a plumber on a Saturday? Like, they're doing all right. And you know what? If a kid wants to work with their hands and that's what they want to do, and they want to become a plumber and work in the trades and maybe open their own business, let's support them in that, right? Let's not look at that and say, oh, you're going to go over here to vote tech. And I will tell you, some of the greatest, when I talk personal and authentic learning that I have seen has been at schools that were typically that like a vote tech type of thing that are now CTE, and kids are leaving. I was working with the district recently. They have a cybersecurity certification, so kids are leaving with these certifications. They had two students last year that graduated, and in their first year in the workforce are making over $70,000. And not that it's about the money, but I didn't start at $70,000 going into education there, right? And so if that's what kids want to do, and then somebody wants to work in cybersecurity, and again, I'm all about the access and the opportunity, not locking kids in, here's what you have to do, but be able to say to them, hey, if that's what you want to do, here's a pathway, here's a way to do that. And we see districts really shifting, going, here's healthcare options, here's things around cybersecurity and coding and all those pieces, and growing. And I'll even see, even into smaller and rural districts, folks doing that. Because for me, it's how do we leverage the interests, the passions, and the strengths of our students so that they can live life on their own terms and give them a way to support that. If it's a four-year college box, awesome, that's a pathway. If it's joining the military and that's what they want to do, awesome, that's a pathway. And so I think looking at it and recognizing, the stigmas of you have to go to a four-year school, I think probably did some damage to some folks. Or, you go to vote tech if you don't fit over here. And what an awful narrative that was, where, hey, those folks are doing well,
you
working
couldn't do
on their passions.
Here.
Yep. Yeah,
but you'll do it here.
And then let's bring in the student debt conversation. How many folks are going to a four-year college, spending $200,000, leaving there, having a degree in basket weaving, being like, I don't know what I want to do for a living, right? And then you've got the folks that went right to a trade school, got some certifications, have zero debt. Now they're in the workforce. Like, who's doing better long term, or at least in the next 10 years? Those are very different positions. And so I think how we define success needs to look different. It's not that 4-year graduation rate for all kids, I mean from a college end, and we need to be okay with that. And I think the backbone of our economy is built on small businesses. The backbone of our economy is built on folks like electricians and plumbers and all those different folks. And as districts, how do we support that so kids can live life in the way that they want to?
Yeah. I mean, even if, like, for example, my kids and me at home, about 3 years ago, if not 4 years ago, we started detailing cars, because I used to detail cars in college as a side gig. And now that my kids were older, I was like, oh, let's do this over the summer. And, both our kids at the time were both in band, in competitive band in Texas, which is expensive. So we had to figure out a way to pay their band fees and pay for 2 separate trips. My oldest son was going to go to Indianapolis for their big band. It's like the Super Bowl, Bands of America competition. And my youngest son, who was in middle school at the time, their band, which feeds into that high school band, they took a trip to Chicago. They were invited. They were the only middle school to be invited to the Midwest Clinic, which is a big convention like this, a big conference all about the arts and music. And we had to find a way. So we picked up the pressure washer and we did what we had to do. And they now know how to do that on their own. Like if they wanted to, if they decided, this college thing might not be for me, okay, maybe take a couple classes at night, pick up some books on the business part of it. Yep. And that way you could start your own business and hire people and learn how to expand and grow that business. Yeah. And like you said, live life the way you want to live it. Yeah,
and you're also hitting on something as somebody that I have my full-time job at Future Ready Schools, and that's my heart and soul. But I own my own business and speaking, and get to do a lot of keynotes and that kind of stuff. And when you're talking about that, there's working in the business, and then there's working on the business. And so when you look at it, going back to the purpose idea, part of the reason that I started speaking is number one, I just love connecting with people. I love motivating people, loved encouraging people, lovingly challenging people. That's why I did it. I didn't go out there saying like, I want to be a business owner. What should I do? Oh, I'm going to be a keynote speaker. It didn't work like that. But then as I started to realize there's a whole side to how do I pay estimated taxes? What can I write off? What can I not write off? How can I be smart about that, right? What does that look like? And those are very different skill sets. And so when you have your passions, working in your passions important, but what you just said is you're giving your own children there some real life examples of also, I'm all about, as a father, some hard work of you're gonna pick that up and we're gonna work through like, here's how you do that, right? Just kind of a little old school parenting on my end, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're giving them the opportunity to learn some skills, but also a safety net where they can fail. Right? Yeah. It's not like if something didn't work or they didn't do it well, they weren't going to be able to eat that night. Probably not that old school parenting, I'm guessing, right? But giving kids the opportunity to fail in a safe environment, I think is a key to that. And as districts shift some of the way they do things to some of those pathways, I would much rather have folks learn that, oh, I don't like blood, maybe I shouldn't be in healthcare before they go spend $120,000 to realize that. Let's give them access, let's give them opportunities in areas that they're interested so that they can figure out what it is that they want to do in life. Don't lock them down in a system where you choose it in 9th grade, now you can't do it that's going to harm kids, we don't want to do that. Yeah. But giving them access and opportunities so that they can find their passion, and that goes back to where it was. For me, people often ask, how do you become a speaker? How do you get to do what you do? And I probably spoke, I would say 200 times before somebody ever offered to pay me to do it. Here's why I say that. I did that because of right here.
The passion.
Not because I thought, gee, if I do this long enough, somebody will offer to pay me and it can support my family. I did it because I'm passionate about it, because I want to get a message out. I want to support people. I want to lovingly challenge people. And I think the same goes back for educators. As I said earlier, I didn't get into an elementary education picturing this lavish life on a lake all the time. That wasn't the case. I got it because I wanted to change lives. And, I think one of the pieces that we always have to go back to is really, what is our purpose? Why do we do what we do? That whole notion of what is your why? On one hand, it might be overplayed. We certainly talk about it, but I think there's a really important piece to. We focus so much stuff, if you're thinking, Cynic's golden circle, on the what and the how, but really bringing it back to why do we do what we do? And I find we need to recenter ourselves at times. You always get that early in the year, that honeymoon period, you're rejuvenated and you deserve, as educators, you need that rest, you deserve that rest, but just recentering ourselves at times to bring us back to what's this really all about. Yeah. Another one of my best friends, Jimmy Casas, he asked the question that I love, what did you say in that interview chair? For me, I'm going to change the lives of kids. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I'm going to love on kids. I'm going to differentiate. I'll do whatever it takes. Like, why was it then 2 months in, I'm like, like, get out of my classroom, right? Like, what happened? Like, what happened there? How did I go from one to the other? And I think it helped me bring it back to, unfortunately, I had an amazing mentor that helped me focus and move my focus from what I taught to who I taught, to shift my perspective, brought me back to, what's this work really about? And if my passion was changing lives and supporting and caring about kids and giving them access and opportunities to help level the playing field so that they can envision a future that they didn't get to see at home, so they can understand things that they may be able to do in the world that maybe mom or dad or whoever they live with isn't talking about, that's the opportunities that we get. And I think it's important for educators, in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of the adversity, in the midst of the toxicity, in the midst of all the political environment that's out there, is to not lose sight of the impact they get to have. You know, you joked earlier about the election, and when we sat down, I joked, I said, what are we talking about, the election, right? That was going to blow up. But here's the thing, bringing it back to, when I go back into that classroom, I'm walking back into that building, at the end of the day, if I'm a third grade student, or I think about my son at fifth grade, or my daughter at ninth grade, no matter who's the president, no matter who's in the Oval Office, I want my teachers loving and caring about my kids, giving them every opportunity, regardless what happens on the outside of those walls. And that comes from passionate people, loving on people, supporting people, and that's why educators, I think, are the greatest people in the world.
Oh, man, that deserves an applause right here, man. Just beautifully put, beautifully put.
Appreciate that. Appreciate
now,
that.
I did fail to mention at the beginning of the show that you were hoping for a plate of wings. But I do have, we break bread on the show in one way, shape, or form. So I do have some donut holes here.
You know, these are no sugar, no fat, correct?
Is
that right?
If you don't eat them, they're no sugar, no fat. Yeah.
All right, there you go. That's good. That's good.
So chew on that. Now, I'm going to give you a little story. When I realized that a male in education, there are certain things that put up red flags and I need to watch out for. I was a paraprofessional. This was a long time ago. I was still in college. And I will never forget, I was screening our ESL students at the time, ELLs as we called them in California at that time, English language learners, to see where they were on the scale in the program and so on and so forth. So I would take them to a small classroom and give them this assessment, record, take notes and anecdotal notes and everything for the look-fors, and then walk them back to the class, get the next student, and so on and so forth. There was one day that I was out, and apparently that day, a father came to the campus ready, for lack of a better word, ready to kill. He was looking for me. Come to find out, the previous day when he picked up his daughter, his kindergarten daughter, from school, he asked, what did you do in school today? Her response was, this man took me out of class and took me to a room. That was it. That's all he heard. So he came to the class ready. So when I heard that story the following day, and after the fact that they talked to him and they showed him the classroom and what I was doing, it made me realize that especially as a male in education, that I will never be in a room with a student or students, or a small group of students, without the door open or without somebody knowing that I'm there. And that really put a red flag, and that made me realize that in this, especially in the classroom situation, in this female-dominated industry of the teaching part of it, that a male is kind of an outlier and viewed, at least at that time, 20-some-odd years ago, viewed in a certain light. So have you ever had a moment in which you realized, I need to have those doors open or anything like that because of who I am as a male?
Yeah, I think it's, and I'd have to really think about that one.
Okay.
Nothing's coming off the top of my head, but here's what I'll reiterate. I think it's vital that, and that this goes beyond, here we are at a conference, right?
Yeah.
To me, this goes beyond being in a school building. It's walking around a conference.
Yes.
It's being in a social event. It's, somebody takes a picture and you're alone with somebody of the other gender. Maybe you're having a great conversation. Maybe it's follow-up about a session that goes on social media, and all of a sudden people are asking questions. Like, hey, what's happening there, right?
Yeah.
could be totally innocent. And so I think what happens is, we do live at a time where you've got to be really careful, because let's be real, there's absolute nonsense that happens out there in this world. There's horrible decisions that are made. People get hurt all the time. And so we've got to be very, very conscious. And as males, we certainly have to take responsibility of that, and also have to be very, very cautious of that. So to your point, whether I'm a teacher in a classroom, always thinking, how do I make sure I'm not in an environment where somebody takes something the wrong way?
Yeah.
One-on-one with a faculty meeting late at night after parent conferences, how do I make sure that person feels very safe and confident? It's kind of, I was walking and it was a late night thing. I was coming back from an event. I was walking and there was a female on the road where I was heading back to my spot, and I noticed she had kind of glanced up and I was walking behind her, and it hit me at that point, like, here's a case where that doesn't cross my mind at all. But I'm sure in her mind was, there's a male behind me in some way. And she actually walked over to the other side of the road, and I kept going, and I kind of gave her weight and said, hey, I'm really and I literally was just walking out of a convention center. But it hit me in two ways. Going back to lens and perspective, as a male, that is not something that I personally worry about, right?
Yeah,
It is not something when I leave or if I'm going, but that's a privilege that I have, and I recognize that. And I kind of gave her a wave and said, hey, I am so sorry if I scared you coming back from this conference over there. I apologize if I scared you or jumped out, and I don't know her past, I don't know her trauma. I didn't know who she was. She was just walking on the side of the road. But it hit me it was enough to her in that environment, in that space. And so I think as males, we can have blinders to that, things that we don't worry about, being in spaces, being at a late night, being at a conference or an event, being some of the last ones there. We've got to be smarter than that. We've got to be intentional. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about students, is how do we see it through their lens, see it through their eyes? She did nothing wrong. I understand why she did what she did, right? Even though I didn't recognize, I was on my phone, I was kind of doing my own thing. But having the understanding, I didn't get upset because I said, hey, I recognize that. If that was, somebody I loved and cared about as a female in my family and they were doing that, I understand. I want them safe. I want them protected. And so with that, again, I think as males, we have to take our blinders off at times, help to see through the lens and see things of, how might that be interpreted? How might that be understood? That also comes down to our communication, to our text messages, to being at an event with folks, and just being really, really clear and be really conscious. And I think that we at times need to kind of overdo that so that the folks that we're around feel safe.
Yeah.
I look at it from, I don't believe it's the person that may feel unsafe. It's not their job to fix any sort of problem. I think for the folks that, like myself, that mentioned in that environment, have the privilege of being like, hey, how might that be misinterpreted? Next time walking down, if that's the environment, I might give that person a little more space, or maybe I'm walking to the other side of the street just so that she didn't feel. I stopped her heart. I'm on my phone texting. I didn't think anything of it. But had I saw that, had I walked to the other just as she wasn't thinking about it, could have just been a case. And again, that's just an everyday example, whether I think it goes back to being in a classroom, being as an educator at a conference, being late night in a building with one or two of the colleagues. We've got to be, especially at any point in time, we really need to be really conscious of those pieces, remove our own blinders, and try to see the world through somebody else's lens. It's not possible, but try to have some empathy there on what we can do to be smart about it, to support people so they feel safe, they feel invited, and also we're amplifying voices and all those different pieces. As men, I think that's a really important role that we play.
Yeah, and you touched upon a very, very true statement a little bit earlier when you mentioned that you said that one of your daughter, her first male teachers in fifth grade?
My son.
Your son.
Grade, yep.
Yeah, so that I was all those students my first year, I was their first male teacher. Usually it's the PE teacher who's the male teacher, and the other male on campus might be, besides maybe custodial services, and that would be an administrator. But other than that, they don't see a lot of us. Yeah. So hats off to every administrator, period. Nevertheless, male administrators, but it's nice to know that is kind of changing. The landscape, I mean, I've seen a lot more male K2 teachers in the past 5 years. Yeah,
let me double down on that further. And that's my perspective as a white male. If we take that to how many black males do we have in the classroom? How many Latinx or Hispanic males do we have in the classroom? Those percentages are minuscule, right? When I think about maybe I'm a black boy as a first grader, when do they get to see and be with somebody that's like them?
Who looks and sounds
and
like
again,
them,
going back to kind of my own experience, I would just growing up in kind of suburban America. Again, we weren't wealthy, but I had everything that I needed, just kind of middle class. Going through school, every teacher of mine looked like me in some way. They spoke like me in some way. And that never really hit me until I went into the workforce and recognizing, wow, I have students. I remember my very first class, I had a student that had just moved in from South America, had a handful of words of English, and was getting and realizing, wow, like the challenge. She was brilliant. What an amazing kid. But she was facing challenges that never crossed my mind when I was in 4th grade. And so I think it's really important. So if you're a school or district leader listening to this, one of the areas of recruiting a diverse workforce is vital, right? We serve such a diverse, and I love the diversity of our students that come to us as that continues to grow in our country. And when we think about our hiring practices, right? Part of it, I always love when I'm working with admin and we're talking about these kinds of things. What is the makeup of your cabinet? If I'm a superintendent, a lot of times it's 5 or 6 folks that look like me. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a female or 2 that will talk to you about, sometimes I feel like I'm in that good old boys club. I'll have that conversation.
Yeah, I've heard that many times. Yeah.
But when we look at that, our hiring practices, sometimes folks will say, well, we put it out, but we didn't get any black applicants, right? And what a passive way to handle that, as opposed to how can I form partnerships with Howard University? How can I form partnerships and actively recruit is very different than I put it out. These are the applicants that I got, and if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we've always gotten. And so we look at our hiring and recruiting practices. We need to be intentional about saying, how can I recruit a diverse workforce? How can I recruit a workforce that's going to resemble and be similar to the demographics of my own students? And so with that, we want to make sure that our kids come through and they feel at home. They have that sense of belonging. They can learn from somebody that's like them and share them. And there's so many different ways we can define what that looks like.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I could chat with you for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have the time. And you got a session
I got to go present.
Yeah, you got to go present. So really quickly, how can people connect with you on social media and in the internet out there?
Sure. So I'd go to thomascmurray.com and Thomas C. Murray on X and Thomas C. Murray EDU on Instagram, and some one combination of those or the other on Facebook and all those kinds of things as well. I'll just take my last moment to just say, if you're an educator and you're still listening to this, 30 minutes in, thank you for your work. Thanks for loving and caring about kids. Thanks for the late nights, the early mornings, and thanks for what you do each day to invest in the lives of the people of our future.
Absolutely. I do have one. I have the $1 million question for you if you're ready for it.
Good. What do you got?
Corn tortillas or flour tortillas?
Flour tortillas, 100%.
Okay.
100%.
All right. Sounds good, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for everything you do in our educational space, brother.
Appreciate you, my man.
Have a good session. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right, thanks.
All right. See ya.